The ring hit the water before she did. Tasha watched it fall, that small circle of gold that had meant everything 6 months ago, and she felt nothing. That was the worst part. Not the pain. The nothing. The absolute hollow quiet where a life used to be. She stood on the railing of Honggang Bridge at 2:17 in the morning with Seoul sprawling behind her like a city that had never heard her name. Rain so heavy it turned the streetlights into blurs, and she thought, nobody will miss a nurse who couldn't save her own heart. She had saved 43 lives in the last year. She could not save this one. The Han River was black and endless below her. 30 feet down. Maybe more. The rain hammered her scrubs flat against her skin, and her long straight hair was plastered across her face, and she pushed it back one last time like it mattered, like she was still the kind of woman who cared about small things like that. She closed her eyes. She let go of the railing. And the water rose. Not like a wave. Not like a flood. Like arms. Like the river gathered itself upward in one impossible motion. Reaching, rushing, as if something beneath the surface had been waiting for exactly this moment and would absolutely not allow it. The water hit her like an embrace, not an impact, and she gasped and went under, and the world became cold and black, and then there were hands. Strong. Fast. Moving through the water in a way that didn't make sense, that cut against the current like the current was simply an opinion this person had chosen to disagree with. She felt herself pulled upward, surface breaking, rain on her face, and she coughed and choked and grabbed at the arms around her because her body, her stupid, surviving, betraying body, wanted to live even when she had decided otherwise. She forced her eyes open. Long black hair, soaked and dark. A face so sharp and still it looked carved from something older than stone. And eyes. She would tell herself later she imagined this. She would insist on it. Eyes that held a faint silver blue light that had nothing to do with the reflection off the river. He was looking at her with an expression she could not name. Not relief. Not alarm. Something far older than either of those things. Something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. She opened her mouth. The world went dark. She woke up in her own hospital. Nurse Yuna was sitting beside her bed crying with her hands pressed to her mouth, and when Tasha blinked, Yuna made a sound like a small animal and grabbed both of Tasha's hands and said her name 6 times in a row. Tasha lay still and let the ceiling of Honggang Medical Center tell her she was alive. The lights were too bright. The pillow was stiff. The heart monitor beside her beeped with aggressive consistency, as if making a point. She was alive. She had not chosen this. Yuna told her what she knew. Anonymous call, no name. Paramedics arrived to find Tasha already stabilized on the riverbank. First aid done at a level that made the paramedics question whether a trauma surgeon had been present. No cameras had captured anything useful. No witnesses had come forward. Whoever had been on that bridge had not wanted to be found. Tasha looked down at her own hand. She was holding something. Her fist was closed around it. She didn't remember picking it up. She opened her fingers. A smooth river stone. Dark gray. And carved into it, impossibly fine, impossibly precise, 2 words in Korean that she had to show Yuna to translate. Yuna read it. Went quiet. Then, softly. 살아있어라. It means, keep living. Tasha stared at the stone for a long time. Then she put it in the pocket of her hospital gown and turned toward the window and watched the rain against the glass until Yuna thought she had fallen asleep. She hadn't. She was thinking about silver blue eyes. She was thinking about how the water had felt when it rose. Warm, intentional, specific, like it had known her name. She did not tell Yuna about the eyes. She did not tell anyone. 3 days later, she went back to work because lying in a hospital bed gave her too much time to think, and thinking was currently her most dangerous activity. She tied her hair back, put on her scrubs, and walked into the ICU with her chin up and her chest hollow and her hands remarkably steady for someone who had jumped off a bridge 72 hours ago. She stopped in the corridor outside the new wing. She had walked past the donor plaque on this wall every single day for 3 months. She had never actually read it. She read it now. Donated in full by Kaizon Shingod Empire Group. She stared at the name. Something about it pulled at her the way the current had pulled at her legs in the river. Not violent, just insistent. She was still staring when the voice came from behind her. Low. Measured. Calm as deep water on a windless day. 간호사님, 길을 막고 계세요. She turned around. He was in a charcoal suit. Hair down past his shoulders. Dry and dark and impossibly neat for a man who had been standing in a corridor with no obvious reason to be there. He was looking at her the way you look at someone you have never met. Courteous. Distant. Completely blank. It was him. She knew immediately. The face. The stillness. The particular quality of the air around him that felt less like atmosphere and more like the surface of a lake right before something large moves beneath it. Her heart was beating very fast. She kept her voice even. You pulled me out of that river. I don't know what you're referring to. 3 nights ago. Hangang Bridge. I think you may be. It was raining, she said. You were standing in the rain holding me. And your hair was completely dry. Something moved across his face. Not much. A muscle in his jaw. The smallest possible fracture in the perfect surface of his composure. Gone in under a second. But she caught it. You've been through something traumatic, he said. It's understandable that. My name is Tasha Okonkwo. I'm an ICU nurse. I know what shock looks like from the inside, and this isn't it. She held his gaze. Your hair was dry. He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly too long to be comfortable. Then he said, very quietly, get some rest, Nurse Okonkwo, and walked away. Behind him, down the entire length of the corridor, every water dispenser on the wall turned on simultaneously. He stopped walking, stood with his back to her, then kept moving. Around the corner. Gone. Tasha looked at the dispensers. They ran for 3 seconds and cut off in unison. She looked at the corner where he had disappeared. She looked at her own hands. I'm not confused, she said to the empty corridor. Nobody answered. But somewhere in the building, she could have sworn, she heard what sounded like rain beginning on a roof, and the forecast had said clear skies until Thursday. That evening, she was on the hospital rooftop eating Mama Ife's jollof rice from a takeout container, the Nigerian woman who ran a food cart outside the hospital entrance and who Tasha had been stopping at every single day for 6 months in a way that felt less like habit and more like necessity. When she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Kaizan Shin standing at the rooftop entrance with his hands in his pockets and no visible explanation for his presence, she stared at him. He looked at the city. This is a patient and staff-only area, she said. I own the building. That's not the same thing as. The view is good, he said, and sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them, and looked at Seoul like a man who had been looking at cities for longer than cities typically exist. She watched him for a moment. Then she turned back to her food. They sat in silence long enough for the silence to become something other than awkward, something almost comfortable. She finished eating. A light wind moved across the rooftop. Below them, Seoul pulsed and glittered. Then she said, without fully planning to, in Nigeria we say the ocean doesn't forget anyone it's touched. He went very still. Not tense still. The other kind. The kind that looks like stillness from the outside but is something much larger on the inside. Where did you hear that? He asked. My grandmother. She had this thing about water. Like it was alive. Like it had opinions. Tasha smiled faintly at the memory, the first genuine softness on her face in months. She used to say the river near our house recognized her. That it moved differently when she was near it. She paused. Everyone thought she was eccentric. What did you think? I thought she was the sanest person I'd ever met. A pause. Then Kaizan said, quietly in Korean, like it was meant more for himself than for her. 당신 할머니가 옳았어요. Tasha looked at him. Your grandmother was right, he translated, without her asking. She studied his profile. The clean line of his jaw. The absolute stillness of him that should have felt cold but somehow didn't. She thought about river stones with words carved into them. She thought about silver blue eyes underwater. She said, who are you? And he said, with something in his voice she couldn't identify, something that sounded almost like an answer and almost like an apology. Someone who should not be on this roof. He stood, buttoned his jacket. This is he said her name in Korean, and it sounded different in his mouth. It sounded like something that had been said before in a different century. Please eat more. You've lost weight. And then he left. Behind him, on the rooftop, it began to rain. Softly. Specifically. Only on that roof. Nowhere else in Seoul. Tasha held out her hand and felt the rain hit her palm and tilted her head back and looked up at a sky that was perfectly clear in every direction, except directly above her, and she said to no one in particular, what is happening to me? Elsewhere in the city, in a penthouse tower that overlooked the Han River from the east, a woman with porcelain skin and ice-cold elegance stood at a window and watched the pinpoint of rain on a hospital rooftop and said nothing at all. Her name was Hasaran. She had been looking for Tasha Okonkwo for 300 years. And now she had found her. The next morning, Saran walked into Hangang Medical Center like she owned it, which she didn't. But nobody told her that because she carried herself like someone who had never been told anything she didn't already know. She wore a cream blazer and her black hair was pinned perfectly, and she smiled at the reception desk with the kind of warmth that makes people want to help you before you've even asked for anything. She found Tasha in the cafeteria during the 15-minute break that was the closest thing to rest an ICU nurse got between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. Tasha was drinking terrible vending machine coffee and staring at nothing with the focused intensity of someone reorganizing their entire understanding of reality, which was exactly what she was doing. Saran sat down across from her like they had arranged this. "Tasasijo. Done in Hasarinia," she said, and then immediately switched to English, smooth and effortless. "I'm the new cultural liaison for the Shingad Empire Partnership. I'll be working with your department on the International Medical Exchange Program." She extended a hand. Her fingers were cold. Tasha shook it and filed that detail away without knowing why. "I've heard good things about you," Saran said, and she was so warm and so genuine that Tasha felt something in her chest relax slightly, the particular relief of meeting a woman who felt safe, which was a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. Jason had dismantled her ability to trust people the way a flood dismantles furniture. Slowly, then completely. They talked for 20 minutes. Saran was funny and sharp and asked Tasha real questions and listened to the answers. She complimented Tasha's hair with the specific admiration of someone who meant it. She ordered them both fresh coffee from the cafeteria counter without asking, and somehow got the order exactly right. When she left, Tasha watched her go and thought, "I like her. I actually like her." On the table between them, Tasha's coffee cup sat cooling. The surface of the liquid was perfectly still. Not a ripple. Not a spiral. Saran's empty cup, on the other hand, had left a ring of frost on the table that disappeared before Tasha noticed it. 2 floors up, behind a window in the hospital administrative corridor, Kaizan stood with his hands clasped behind his back and watched Saran cross the lobby below and felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He turned to Heimo, who stood beside him with the expressionless patience of a man who had been managing impossible situations for decades. "얼마나 오래됐어?" "How long has she been here?" "She landed in Seoul 6 weeks ago," Heimo said. "Before the bridge incident. She was here before it happened." Kaizan said nothing. Heimo had learned over many years to read the particular quality of his silences, and this one was the kind that meant something large was being calculated behind perfectly calm eyes. And the nurse? Still no awareness of her own capability. But it's accelerating. 3 incidents in the last 4 days. Base 7 flatline. She walked in and the monitor recovered before she touched the patient. A syringe rolled back to her hand in corridor C. And yesterday, Heimo paused. One of the interns reported that the water in the surgical scrub sink ran backwards for approximately 8 seconds while Nurse Okonkwo was washing her hands. What did the intern do? Requested a mental health day. Kaizan turned from the window. Watch Saran. I want to know every person she speaks to in this building. Including the nurse? A pause. Especially the nurse. He walked away down the corridor. Behind him, the water in the wall-mounted hand sanitizer dispensers trembled in their reservoirs like they were trying to follow. Tasha noticed things she had no framework for. It started small and got less small very quickly. She reached for a chart that was sliding off a counter, and it stopped sliding before she touched it. She walked past a patient in Bay 12 who had been running a fever for 36 hours, and when she put her hand on his forehead, the fever broke in 4 minutes, and the attending physician spent the next hour interrogating the medication logs looking for an explanation that wasn't there. She filled a glass of water at the nurse's station sink and stood there for 10 seconds without moving, and when she looked down, the water was spiraling in a slow clockwise current with no physical cause. She put the glass down, walked to the supply closet, stood in the dark for 2 minutes breathing carefully. Then she walked back out and finished her shift because there was a man in Bay 9 who needed her and whatever was happening to her could wait. After her shift, she went to Mama Ife's cart. She had been doing this every day since she arrived in Seoul 2 years ago, pulled there by something she'd always explained as homesickness. The smell of palm oil and crayfish, the sound of Yoruba mixing with Korean in the street, the feeling of being known by someone in a city that didn't know her name. Mama Ife was 70-something and enormous and had the kind of laugh that rearranged the air in a room. She had been in Seoul for 40 years and spoke Korean with a Yoruba accent that somehow made it sound more authoritative than the natives. Today, Mama Ife looked at Tasha for a long moment before she served her and then said, stirring her pot without looking up, "Omi en ranti o omomi." Tasha went still. "You always say that to me. What does it mean?" "The water remembers you, my child." "My grandmother used to say something like that." "I know," Mama Ife said simply. Tasha looked at her. "How would you know what my grandmother said?" Mama Ife smiled at her pot. "Eat first." "Mama Ife." The food is getting cold and you haven't eaten a proper meal since Tuesday. Eat first. Then ask your questions. Tasha ate. Then she said, something is happening to me. Yes. Things are moving. Water is doing things it shouldn't do. I broke a man's fever today by touching his head, and I have worked in ICU long enough to know that is not how fevers work. No, Mama Ife agreed. It is not. Are you going to tell me what's happening to me? Mama Ife finally looked up from her pot. Her eyes were warm and ancient and full of something that was not surprise at all. Not yet, she said. But soon. When you're ready. I'm ready now. You think you are. Mama Ife reached across the cart and patted Tasha's hand with a palm that was warm as sunlight. There is a man. You've met him. You felt it the moment you saw him, even underwater. Even half drowned. Tasha said nothing. When you understand what he is, Mama Ife said, then you'll be ready. Tasha walked back to her apartment in the dark with her hands in her pockets and her mind running fast, and when she got to her door, she stood outside it for a moment and looked up at the sky and said quietly in Yoruba, the language she only knew fragments of, the language her grandmother had spoken. Omi, kianai, ofelo omi. Water. What do you want from me? The street light above her flickered. In her apartment building's basement, a pipe that had been dry for 2 years filled with water for no documented reason. The building superintendent would find it in the morning and spend a week trying to explain it. She went inside. She did not sleep. Meanwhile, across the city in a parking structure under Shingat Empire Tower, Hamo had Jason Park backed against a concrete pillar with the kind of stillness that is more frightening than aggression. Jason was Korean-American, handsome in the way that had always worked for him, and currently very aware that it was not working now. You've been in Seoul for 4 days, Hamo said. You went to the hospital. You stood outside her ward for 11 minutes, and then you left. Then you contacted someone with the initials SH, and you told them she was, what was the word, functional. Jason said nothing. Functional, Hamo repeated. That is an interesting word for a man to use about the woman he claimed to love. It sounds less like concern and more like a status report. I don't know what you're. The Saranha Foundation hired you 2 years ago, Hamo said. Before Tasha Okonkwo had ever heard your name. You were given a profile. Psychological assessment. Specific instructions on how to approach her. What to say. How to escalate. How to make her feel like the relationship was her fault. How to make her feel like she was the problem, the burden, the one who was not enough. His voice did not rise. Did not need to. The abuse was not a failure of character, Mr. Park. It was a method. You were a weapon. And I want to know exactly what you were aimed at. Jason's jaw was tight. If I tell you anything. You are in a parking structure in Seoul at 11 p.m. with no one who knows your location, speaking to a man who has been managing threats to a 2,000-year-old water deity for longer than your country has existed, Hamo said. I would recalibrate your concern about what Saranha might do and focus on the present conversation. Jason broke. He told Hamo everything. About the foundation reaching out to him in Chicago. About the profile they gave him. Tasha Okonkwo, Nigerian, ICU nurse. Relocating to Seoul on scholarship, specific psychological vulnerabilities, specific emotional architecture. About the instructions. Get close, gain trust, escalate over 18 months, make her feel small, make her feel worthless, make her feel like the world was better without her. And if she tried to leave, escalate further. Break the tide soul before she awakens, Saran had told him. And he hadn't known what that meant. He still didn't, not fully. He had just known that the money was significant and the instructions were specific, and he had told himself, the way people tell themselves things when they want to not know what they know, that it was just a relationship gone wrong. She almost died, Hamo said. I know, Jason said. And to his credit, or perhaps just to his humanity, he looked like he knew. You said the serum was diluted. What serum? And Jason told him about that too. Something Saran had given him to put in Tasha's food in the final months of the relationship. A suppressant. Designed, Saran had said, to dull certain natural sensitivities. He had thought it was something like a sedative. Something to keep her compliant while he did what he'd been hired to do. He had not known it was divine. He had not known what she was. Hamo took Jason's phone. Sent a single message to Kaizan from his own device. One word. Sanyang. Hunt. In his penthouse, Kaizan read the message. He stood at his reflecting pool, that long, still, interior stretch of water that ran the length of his living room, and that he had always told visitors was an aesthetic choice, and he looked at the water for a long time. Then he looked at the wall. There was a painting there. Very old. Ink on silk, Korean, from the Joseon period. It showed a man standing at the edge of the ocean in the dark, looking out. The man had long hair. The sea around him was calm in a way that seas are not naturally calm, intentionally calm, specifically calm as if it was listening. He had painted it himself. He had been standing there when it happened. He remembered the night. He remembered the cold. He remembered the feeling of something he loved sinking into water. He could not, for reasons of his own brokenness in that moment, command. He had not told Tasha about this. He had not told her that the reason the water had caught her was not just because she was a tide soul. It was because he had been waiting, without knowing it, without admitting it to himself, across 500 years of human lifetimes and rising cities and changing dynasties, and the slow, relentless turning of the world. He had been waiting for that specific face to appear above the surface of the Han River. And when it had, the water had moved before he could think. He closed his eyes. He thought about a woman laughing on a rooftop, eating rice from a container. He thought about the specific way she had said, "I'm not confused," in a hospital corridor with wet hair and absolute certainty in her eyes and no idea, no possible idea, how much she sounded like someone he had loved in a different century, in a different river, in a world that no longer existed. He thought about Saran. He thought about what Jason had been paid to do. He put his hand flat on the surface of the reflecting pool. The water, his water, the water that obeyed him above all things, went still as glass. And then, very quietly, so that only he and the water could hear it, he said, "세린이 그녀를 건드리게 두지 않을 거야." I will not let Saran touch her. The hospital board meeting was on a Wednesday. Tasha found out about it the way she found out about most bad things lately, without warning, in a corridor, from someone who looked uncomfortable delivering the news. The administrator, a small, precise Korean man named Mr. Cho, stopped her between rounds and told her there had been some concerns raised about her mental fitness to practice, and that a formal review had been scheduled for Friday, and that she should perhaps arrange representation. She stood very still in the corridor and said, "What kind of concerns?" Mr. Cho looked at his clipboard. "There have been reports. Unusual behavior. A junior nurse reported seeing you speak to a glass of water in the station. An intern filed an incident report about the scrub sink. And there is additional material that has been submitted to the board. Of a personal nature." "What material?" He cleared his throat. "Photographs. And a medical statement from a Dr. Jason Park, who identified himself as your former fiancé, regarding your emotional stability." Tasha looked at Mr. Cho for a long moment. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Thank you, Mr. Cho," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "I'll be there Friday." She walked to the end of the corridor, turned the corner, put her back against the wall and pressed her hands flat against it and breathed through her nose for 30 seconds, the way they taught you to breathe in crisis training when you were the professional and not the patient. Then she pushed off the wall and went back to work, because there was a woman in Bay 4 who had been fighting for her life for 3 days, and Tasha was not going to let her do it alone. She did not cry. She had learned recently that when she cried it rained, and she was not going to give this city the satisfaction. She did not know that across town, in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of Shingat Empire Tower, Kaizan was reading the same material that had been submitted to the hospital board. Heimo had obtained it within the hour. Photographs, taken from angles that suggested long-range surveillance, of Tasha and Kaizan at the hospital rooftop. At the bridge the night he pulled her out. Outside the building. Together and apart, and in moments that felt private because they were private, because you do not expect to be photographed on a rooftop at midnight in the rain. The medical statement from Jason was 4 pages long. Clinical language doing cruel work. Words like delusional and erratic and history of self-destructive ideation arranged with the specific care of someone who knew exactly what damage they would do. Kaizan read every word. When he finished, he set the papers down on his desk with a precision that was more frightening than force. He looked at Heimo. "세린이 직접 이걸 작성했어. Saran drafted this herself." "Yes," Heimo said. "The language is too specific. She knows Tasha's psychological profile better than someone who only just arrived would. She has been building this file for months. Possibly longer. The photographs, professional surveillance, started before the bridge incident. So she was watching Tasha before I pulled her out of the river." "Yes." Kaizan stood, walked to his window. Seoul in the afternoon light, enormous and indifferent. She wanted me to find Tasha compromised, discredited. If the tide soul is publicly unstable, if no one believes her, then anything she discovers, anything she says about what she is or what I am, becomes the statement of a disturbed woman. It also removes her from the hospital, Heimo said carefully. Isolated, unemployed, without the structure that has been keeping her functional since she arrived in Seoul. "Make it stop," Kaizan said. The board meeting. The photographs. The statement. Make it stop quietly and completely. And Tasha? He was quiet for a moment. She doesn't need to know I intervened. Hemo said nothing, which was his way of saying he disagreed. Mareso, Hemo. I said so, Hemo. Yes, Hemo said. You did. He left. Kaizan turned back to the window. Below him, the Han River caught the afternoon sun and threw it back at the sky in long flat pieces of light. He watched it for a moment the way you watch something you made a long time ago, with the particular mix of pride and sorrow that comes from outliving your own creations. He had not lied to Tasha. He had simply not told her everything. He told himself this was different. The water in his reflecting pool, visible from where he stood, turned briefly, just for a second, in the wrong direction. He did not look at it. That evening, Tasha went to Mama Ife's cart and found it closed for the first time in 6 months. A small handwritten note in Yoruba and Korean read, "Come find me when you are ready to know. You know where I live." Below it was an address. A small apartment building 3 blocks from the hospital that Tasha had walked past 100 times without noticing. She stood outside it for 5 minutes. Then she went up. Mama Ife's apartment was nothing like what Tasha expected. It was small and warm and smelled of shea butter and dried herbs and something older than both, something that reminded Tasha of her grandmother's house near the river in a way that made her chest ache with a homesickness so specific it felt like grief. There were no decorations on the walls, only water. Small bowls of it on every surface, on the windowsill, on the table, on the floor in each corner of the room. Still, watchful. Mama Ife poured tea and sat down and looked at Tasha and said, "Ask me. What am I?" "You are a tide soul." It is a term from before your language and mine existed. It means a human vessel born of a divine water lineage. Once every 500 years, a woman is born who carries in her blood the echo of an ancient water deity. In your case, the deity Okos, one of the original Yoruba spirits who shaped the Atlantic and who worked alongside the Korean water gods in the age before the world had countries. Tasha held her teacup in both hands and said nothing. Your power has been awakening. The things you've been experiencing, the fever you broke, the water moving toward you, that is not malfunction. That is inheritance. And Kaizan, he is Haitian, the Korean god of the deep waters. Ancient. Banished to the human world 300 years ago for loving a mortal woman. He built an empire here because gods who cannot go home build other things instead. He pulled me from the river. He was across the city when you jumped, Mama Ife said. The water called him. He moved through the Han River in less than 4 minutes. That is not possible for a man, Tasha. Even a god in human form should not have been able to move that fast. She paused. Unless the pull was exceptional. Tasha set down her tea. What does he want from me? That is a more complicated question than it sounds. Mama Ife folded her hands. A tide soul and a water god who enter a willing bond become something greater than either alone. The tide soul anchors the god to the human world permanently, not as a prisoner, as a choice. His power becomes stable. Whole. Complete. Without the bond, a water god in exile slowly diminishes. Becomes less. So he needs me. Everyone needs something, child. The question is what he wants. Is there a difference? There is always a difference. Tasha stood. Walked to the window. Soul at dusk below. Ansaran. Hasaran is a goddess of surface waters. Smaller in rank than Kaizan, larger in ambition. She has been searching for the tide soul for 300 years. Not because she wants the bond. She cannot form it. She wants to prevent it. A water god without his tide soul is governable. Controllable. She wants the divine water throne, and she wants Kaizan too weakened to hold it. And Jason was her instrument. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Tasha turned from the window slowly. Say that again. Mama Ife's voice was gentle, but she did not soften the words. Jason Park was recruited by Hasaran 2 years before you met him. He was given your profile, your psychology, your history. He was told exactly how to approach you, how to gain your trust, how to dismantle you from the inside over 18 months. The abuse was not random cruelty, Tasha. It was a strategy. Break the tide soul before she awakens, before she meets her water god, and the power never fully surfaces. She sent him to destroy me. She sent him to make you want to destroy yourself. The bowl of water on the windowsill beside Tasha began to tremble. Not because of her hands were still. The water was trembling on its own, agitated, as if reacting to something in the air around her. And it almost worked, Tasha said quietly. Yes. And then you stood on that bridge and the river rose before you even fell, because the water knew you and would not lose you. And Kaizan came. And here we are. Does he know? About Jason, about what Saran did. Mama Aoife looked at her steadily. Yes. How long has he known? Several days. The water in the bowl went still. Then it rose. Just an inch. Just enough. A column of water lifting from the bowl and holding in the air above it, perfectly formed, perfectly controlled, completely impossible. Tasha stared at it. She hadn't thought about doing it. She hadn't told her hands to do anything. It had simply happened the way breathing happens, automatically, in response to what the body needed to do. She was furious. She was more furious than she had ever been in her life, and the column of water climbed another inch and Mama Aoife watched it with the calm expression of someone watching a long-expected sunrise. He knew, Tasha said, that the man who hurt me was sent. He knew that my entire relationship, every moment of it, was manufactured to break me. And he said nothing. He was protecting you. From what? From the truth about my own life? From pain. That is not his decision to make. The water dropped back into the bowl. Tasha picked up her bag. Thank you, Mama Aoife, for telling me what he wouldn't. Tasha, I need some air. She walked out of the apartment and down the stairs and out into the soul night, and the moment the cold air hit her face, she stopped on the pavement and pressed her hands over her eyes and breathed. She was angry at Kaizan. She was angry at Saran. She was devastated about Jason in the specific way you are devastated when you discover that something you blamed yourself for was never your fault. Not the relief you expect, but a grief more complicated than the original wound, because all the self-hatred has nowhere to go now. She was angry at herself for the self-hatred. She was also, underneath all of it, thinking about something Mama Aoife had said. The water called him. He moved through the Han River in less than 4 minutes. Unless the pull was exceptional. She was thinking about a rooftop in the rain. About 당신 할머니가 오랐어요. About a man who had been looking at Seoul from the same river for 300 years, building an empire because he couldn't go home, carrying something in his eyes that looked like loss the same way the ocean looks like loss, vast and blue and permanent. She was thinking about all of it and she was furious, and she was also, God help her, already walking toward Shingad Empire Tower. She called his number. She didn't know when she had saved it. She didn't remember doing it, but it was there in her phone like it had always been, and he answered on the first ring. Tessa, I know about Jason, she said. I know about what Saran did. I know about all of it. And I know that you knew. Silence. I'm outside your building, she said. Let me up. A longer silence. Then, quietly. Nah, yes. The lobby doors opened before she reached them. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse and Tasha walked in and stopped. She had expected something cold. Something that matched the charcoal suits and the measured voice and the absolute composure of a man who had been alive for nearly 3,000 years. She had expected marble and steel and the kind of interior design that communicates power without warmth. Instead, the first thing she felt was water. Not saw. Felt. The way you feel humidity before you see rain. The penthouse was warm, and the reflecting pool ran the full length of the living room floor, lit from beneath, casting slow-moving light across the ceiling like sunlight through shallow ocean. There were no excessive decorations. Just space and water and the enormous Seoul skyline through glass walls that made the city look like something he had arranged for his own viewing. Kaizan was standing at the far end of the reflecting pool with his back to her. His jacket was off. His hair was down. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, like something other than controlled. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. She walked to the edge of the reflecting pool and stood across it from him and said, "Look at me." He turned. His eyes were dark. No silver. Just dark and tired and older than anything had a right to be. How long, she said, have you known about Jason? Several days. And you said nothing. I was handling it. Handling it. She repeated the words the way you repeat something to make sure you heard it correctly. A man was hired to psychologically destroy me over 18 months. He was given my profile like a blueprint. Everything he did, every moment of cruelty, every time he made me feel like I was too much or not enough or broken or worthless, every single moment of it was a job. And when you found out, you decided to handle it. Without telling me. I didn't want to cause you more pain. That is not your decision to make, Kaizan. I know. I am not something you manage. I am not a situation. I know. Then why? Because I was afraid, he said. Loudly. The first time she had heard him raise his voice, and it was not angry, it was desperate, and it stopped her mid-sentence. He pressed his hand to the back of his neck and looked at the ceiling, and when he looked back at her, his eyes had the silver in them, just at the edges, just barely. I was afraid of exactly this. Of you looking at me the way you're looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? Like you're deciding whether I'm worth trusting. The pool between them was perfectly still. Tasha said, "Are you?" He said nothing for a moment. Then he walked around the edge of the pool until he was standing a few feet from her, and she held her ground because she had not come here to step back from anything. "Sedojine," he said, dropping into Korean the way people drop into their native language when the thing they're saying is too true for anything else. "당신이 다리에서 뛰어내렸을 때 나는 한강 동쪽 끝에 있었어." She waited. 3 months ago, when you jumped from that bridge, I was at the eastern end of the Han River. 4 kilometers away. I felt it before I heard anything. Before the water moved. I felt it here. He touched his chest, flat palm, like something tearing. And I moved through the river in less than 4 minutes, and I still almost didn't reach you in time. Mama Ifa told me that wasn't possible. It isn't. Then how? Because, he said, and his voice was very quiet now, the water does not move that fast for a goddess, it is meeting for the first time. The ceiling light rippled. The pool reflected it across both their faces in slow shifting waves. Tasha said, "What does that mean?" He looked at her steadily. There was a woman. 500 years ago. She was Nigerian. She lived near a river. She was the last tide soul before you. A puss. I loved her. She was human. Fully human, her power never awakened, and she became ill and I could not save her. The water I command, the same water that can move mountains and reshape coastlines, could not stop a human sickness. And she died. Tasha was very still. I shattered, he said simply. The part of me made of grief broke off and sank to the bottom of the water, and I have been, he paused, searching, incomplete since then. Diminished. Not in power. In something harder to name. Kaizan. Mama Ifa told you something tonight that I should have told you, he said. I know. But there is something she may not have told you. Something I discovered when I pulled you from the river, and the water recognized you the way it only recognizes something it has held before. Tasha felt the back of her neck prickle. "당신은 그녀라," he said softly. "You are her. The tide soul from 500 years ago. The water kept her soul, kept it in the deep where I could not reach it, and returned it. To you. In this body. In this time." The room was silent except for the soft movement of water. Then Tasha said, "That's why I felt calm. When I was sinking. That's why underwater, looking at your face, I wasn't afraid. Yes. And that's why I know Korean words I never learned. Why your name felt familiar before I knew it. Why my grandmother's house near the river felt like..." She stopped. "Like home," he finished. "Like you," she said. Neither of them moved. Then Tasha said, "I'm still angry at you. I know. You don't get to decide what I can handle. I know. And if you keep things from me again, I will." She stopped, looked at the reflecting pool, looked back at him. "I will make it rain inside this building, and I will not apologize." Something happened to his face. Something small and enormous at the same time. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely, and his eyes went soft in a way that changed his entire face, that made him look less like an ancient god and more like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just, in this moment, set it down. "Understood," he said. "Good." They stood there for a moment in the rippling light. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it, and every trace of softness left his face. "세린이야," he said. "세린." The message was simple. 3 lines. She had sent it to both of them. She had Tasha's number, had taken it during their cafeteria meeting with a smile and a cup of coffee that was exactly right. "타사에게, 다리로 나오세요. 우리 끝냅시다." For Tasha. "Come to the bridge. Let us finish this." Below it, a photograph. Mama Ifa's apartment building. The lights on in Mama Ifa's window. The implication was clear and it was not subtle. Tasha read it. Put her phone in her pocket. Picked up her bag. "Don't," Kaizan said. She threatened Mama Ifa. "I will handle." Tasha turned and looked at him and he stopped talking. "Come with me," she said. "Or don't." "But I am going." He went. The bridge was quiet at that hour. The way Seoul goes quiet after midnight. Not silent. Never silent. But hushed. The city breathing slower. The river below dark and enormous and patient. Saran was standing at the center of the bridge with her hands clasped in front of her, wearing white, her hair down for the first time, and she looked, Tasha thought, genuinely tired. Not the performance of tiredness. The real thing. The kind that lives in the bones after centuries. She looked at Tasha first. 나는 당신을 미워하지 않아요. She said. I don't hate you. I want you to know that. I know, Tasha said. I think that's almost worse. Something moved across Saran's face. I have been searching for the Tide Soul for 300 years. Do you understand what 300 years feels like? Watching civilizations build and collapse. Watching the man I wanted become more unreachable with every century. Not because he rejected me, he was always honest about that, but because some part of him was always missing. Always sunk somewhere I couldn't reach. She paused. And then you appeared. And the missing part surfaced. Saran, Kaizan said. Non temarjima, she said sharply. Don't. Let me finish. She looked back at Tasha. I sent Jason to you. I built the file. I submitted the photographs to the hospital board. I did all of it. I am not going to pretend otherwise. She reached into her coat, held up a small glass vial. And I came here tonight with this. A divine suppressant. If this enters your bloodstream, your Tide Soul power is permanently severed. You live. You are healthy and human and ordinary, and you never know what you were. Kaizan loses his anchor, and the water throne becomes manageable. Tasha looked at the vial. Then why are we talking? Saran was quiet for a moment. Because, she said, I watched you walk into that hospital this week after everything I did to your career and your reputation, and you went straight to Bay 4, and you sat with that woman for 4 hours and held her hand through the night. And I have been alive for 1,200 years. Her voice was steady, but something behind it was not. I have never in 1,200 years sat with anyone through the night. Just to stay. Just because they needed someone there. Nobody spoke. The Han River moved below them. 나는 지쳤어. Soren said quietly. I am tired. She looked at Kaizan. Not of you. Of wanting things that require me to be someone I apparently cannot sustain being. She looked at the vial. She turned it over in her fingers once. Then she opened her hand and let it fall. It hit the railing. Shattered. The contents ran through the metal grate and fell to the river below, and the river swallowed them without a vent. Saran looked at Tasha one more time. Tangsinur Proya, she said softly. I envy you. Not what you are. How you love. Without calculation. She walked away. Down the bridge. Into the soul night. Not dramatically. Not in tears. Just quietly, the way very old things sometimes end. Not with a crash, but with a door closing softly at the end of a long corridor. Tasha watched her go until she couldn't see her anymore. Then she turned to Kaizan. He was looking at her with those ancient eyes, and the silver was fully in them now, not frightening, just true. Just what he actually was when he stopped managing what she saw. 나는 기억해요, she said. I remember. He went absolutely still. Not everything. Fragments. A different river. A house near the water. A voice that sounded like yours but older. The feeling of, she stopped, pressed her hand to her chest, of leaving something unfinished. Tasha. 500 years is a long time to carry something unfinished, she said. Yes, he said. It is. She reached up and touched his face. Her hand against his jaw. This impossible ancient face. And he closed his eyes the way people close their eyes when something they stopped believing in turns out to be real. The Han River exhaled. Every light on the bridge flickered once. Warm, golden, and held. It started to rain. Not his rain. Not her rain. Theirs. The specific collaborative rain of two water-connected souls in the same place at the same time, finally choosing the same thing. They were immediately, completely, perfectly drenched. And Kaizan left. Quiet and rusty and real, like a sound that had been waiting in a locked room for 500 years and someone had finally found the key. Tasha stared at him, this ancient, devastating, impossible man laughing in the rain on the bridge where she had almost ended everything, and something in her chest cracked open in the best way, like a window thrown wide after a very long winter. She laughed too. Below them, the Han River rose exactly 2 inches. Not dangerously. Not destructively. Joyfully. The way water rises when it is happy, when it remembers something it loved, when it gets back what it kept. Tangsin Pimakuisa, Tasha said, you're getting rained on with enormous satisfaction. 나도 알아요, he said. I know. The god of all deep water is standing in the rain getting wet. Apparently. How does that feel? He looked at her. Silver blue eyes. Ancient face. The corner of that mouth. 물에서 웃는 게 오래됐어요, he said softly. It has been a long time since I laughed in the rain. And a pause. 좋아요. It is good. She took his hand. The river held its risen 2 inches like a breath it wasn't ready to release. Seoul glittered around them, enormous and indifferent as it always was, completely unaware that on a bridge above its most ancient river, a water god had just gotten rained on by choice for the first time in 5 centuries, and a woman who had almost let the water keep her was standing in the downpour like she owned it. Which, it turned out, she did. Dawn came slowly. The sky over Seoul went from black to deep blue to the particular pale gold of a city waking up. They were still on the bridge. Still talking. There was a great deal to say and 500 years of context to say it in, and they were, it seemed, in no particular hurry. Below them, the Han River glittered in the first light. And if you looked closely, if you were paying the kind of attention that most people don't pay to rivers, you could see that the current was moving in 2 directions at once. The deep water moving one way, the surface water moving another. 2 forces, ancient and distinct, finally running parallel. Not the same. Better than the same. Complementary. 물은 모든 것을 기억한다. 타셔 세드 콰이어트리. Water remembers everything, Kaizan agreed. And it never forgets who it loves, she finished. He looked at her. 나도 그래요, he said. Neither do I. The river rose 1 more inch. And held. And there it is. The full story. If you made it to the end of this, you are exactly the kind of person this story was made for. Drop a comment right now and tell me, did you cry? Did you see the reincarnation twist coming? What do you think happened to Saran? And what do you think is coming in part 2? If this story moved you, share it. Send it to someone who needs a reason to believe in something. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that button right now because part 2 is coming and you do not want to walk into it without having seen this one.